Jacob.
Thank you. The subject is the international monetary system, past, present, and future. And as we look at it, we are now very much under the impact of two different paced events. One, 70 years, 75 years since Bretton Woods, and second, 10 years since the great financial crisis. And they are fixing our minds in different ways. The first element, namely the Bretton Woods era, the main change that has taken place since is the development of capital markets and capital flows, with the implied differences. The second, the great financial crisis, the fact that remained with us is the short-term focus that is the legacy of the great financial crisis. As we will look, say, in 20 years, I think that the weight of the GFC in determining our mind will be very different than the weight of the preceding 75 years. So I think that in this regard, we need to ask ourselves, what kind of changes are temporary and what are not? And I liked the organizational principles that Thomas laid at the beginning, saying there was a search for an anchor, a search for instruments, etc. The three instruments that were mentioned, namely Forex intervention, negative interest rates, and maintain exchange rate floor, by definition, are not sustainable. They may be useful at the time, but they are not sustainable, which means that if they characterize the present as we take the journey from the past to the future, their role in finding a place in the future will diminish, and therefore we will need to come back to the question, what will be the instruments in the system that will evolve in the post-Bretton Woods era with capital flows? Will it be with, without capital interventions or not? And this brings me to the focus of Elvira's point, which I thought was very well placed. I wrote down the word, we are reluctant to use the capital flows. Not because they don't want the results of the intervention, but because the results that they aim at will not actually come to bear. And therefore, the issue is it a general rule that capital intervention should not be used, will not be used, where will it be, etc.? And I think that we should really draw a distinction here between emerging economies and advanced economies. Emerging economies really cannot afford losing both the discipline and the fruits that emanate from capital flows. The more advanced economies can play this game. And the dual to it is the need for reserves. Barry, you asked, do we need international reserves? After all, flexible exchange rates, capital markets should have taken care of it, and we see that it's not. Because international reserves are self-insurance. Who needs the self-insurance? Those who will not have access to the capital markets in bad times. And frankly, the more you intervene in the capital market, the more likely is that you will not have the access in the bad times, and the more likely that you will need to resort to self-insurance. So I think that we should think separately between developed and the developing countries. And my final footnote is about the remark that John Williams made, which was actually very perceptive, reminding us about Keynes, when circumstances change, I change my mind, what about you? But remember what John Robinson answered to him, his student. He said it when in a little room together with Roy Herod and John Robinson, and she said, that is correct, but we need first to check the facts and we need to understand them before we change our mind.